All right, thank you so much. Welcome to another episode of the Love Hope Lyme podcast. My name is Fred Diamond. Of course, I'm the author of Love Hope Lyme, what family members, partners, and friends who have a chronic Lyme survivor need to know, and the host of the Love Hope Lyme podcast. I'm going to let you know you can find the podcast on Apple. If you're listening on Apple, subscribe, give us a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate it. We're also on YouTube, and if you're watching this on YouTube, please give us a thumbs up, leave a comment. We would greatly appreciate that as well. Hey, I want to let people know that even though I have a doctor on today's show, this show is not a replacement for medical advice. If you do have challenges with Lyme or mold, we definitely suggest that you go seek proper medical attention. So it's the Love Hope Lyme podcast. You heard briefly from that introduction that we're talking about mold today. I have Ariana Thacker and Dr. Scott McMahon, and I'm very excited. I've spoken to a lot of Lyme survivors and parents, for that matter, with children who have struggled with Lyme, and it's hard. It's hard to deal with. It's hard to go through the process of having mold in addition to chronic Lyme. So we're going to get deep into that topic today, and to talk about what MoldCo is all about. So Ariana Thacker, it's great to see you. Dr. Scott McMahon, it's great to see you as well. Why don't you both introduce yourself, and then Ariana, tell me why you created the company. Ariana, you go first.
Sure. Thank you so much, Fred, and excited to be on the podcast with yourself and Dr. McMahon. So MoldCo was born out of a personal health journey. I was living in Miami in my home, and I started having strange symptoms. I've always been very healthy, no history of health issues. And as the months went by in the unit, I was only in there for about 6.5 months, started having some cognitive deficits. I remember clumps of my hair was coming out. I wasn't able to ingest foods as I normally did. Brain fog, fatigue. There was a point where I was just taking my calls out of my bed because I was just so exhausted to even get out of bed. And previously I was able to do, high intensity classes and boot camps, and then I wasn't suddenly able to walk upstairs without getting winded. So I knew something was off, and a friend tipped me off that it could be mold in my home. The landlords actually hired their own inspector, which made the unit largely look clean. I was a little skeptical, hired my own inspector, and there was highly toxic levels throughout the HVAC system. And I would also even venture behind the walls and other sources that weren't even detected by the mold inspector too. So that was the opening kind of watershed moment for starting MoldCo, and ultimately wasn't able to find an accurate diagnosis or treatment through mainstream medicine, went to a number of different providers and specialists, and had to then figure it out on my own, which so many of these patients do through the different communities and groups. And that's where Dr. McMahon and my path crossed through a common connection, Dr. Shoemaker, who's the pioneer of the so far only evidence and based approach that we've seen for treating mold-related illnesses. So I'll pass the mic over to Scott next for his intro.
Hey, Fred, thanks for having us. I'm Dr. Scott McMahon. I've been a pediatrician since 1992, and I was actively in practice and enjoying my life and enjoying my practice. And in the end of 2009, a couple things happened. And as a result of that, I learned about mold-based illness, and I got connected with Dr. Richie Shoemaker. And I actually evaluated a cohort of 15 people from a local high school. One was a teacher, the other were students, and they were all having roughly the same problems, the same physical problems, cognitive issues, nausea, fatigue, etc. I did some lab tests at the behest of Dr. Shoemaker and a local businessman, and they had an incredible number of abnormal lab tests. I went and visited Dr. Shoemaker to learn more about this, make sure that he was on the level, because I hadn't really read about much of this in the peer-reviewed published literature. And I found that he was legit and he knew what he was doing. I was impressed by the way he kept his data and the way he prosecuted that data to his conclusions. I came back and treated those 15 people. I offered treatment to those who wanted it, those who took the treatment and took it seriously. They all got better. Those who didn't get better. And after that, I realized that this was a real problem that I had never heard of before. And I did as much research as I could. And 15 years later, I've now seen about 2,000 people for mold illness and treated the vast majority of them. And was certified through Dr. Shoemaker's protocol, and just excited to be a part of MoldCo and excited to be here today.
Very good. So, Ariana, where's the company right now in its go-to-market?
Yeah, so we're onboarding patients now in a closed beta. So we're calling it our early bird program. We're live in Texas and Florida, and we'll do a state-by-state rollout later this year. So the product is built. We have a provider team too that's mold certified. So they're working hands-on with patients to take them through the patient journey, which includes a synchronous visit for the onboarding. It includes mold specific labs, which are off the beaten path. These aren't typically ordered by even immunologists or allergists that you go to. So quite unique to this illness and persistently dysregulated across this patient type. And we also have prescription medications that follow or guided by the Shoemaker protocol to help treat the majority of the patients. So that's how the platform is set up. It's entirely digital, and we've worked really hard to have it as affordable and accessible as possible for various patients.
So let's talk about mold for a little bit here, just to kind of give people the status of where we are. So first of all, Scott, tell us a little bit about mold-related illnesses. What are some of the symptoms that come from it? But before you do that, just give us a definition. Are we talking, is this some mysterious thing, or is this really just kind of like what we see every day in a moldy building or an old building or a moldy basement or something like that? Give us kind of a baseline on what exactly is mold.
Well, it's mysterious and we see it every day. So I think that most physicians in the United States see mold patients every single day. They're just not aware of it because they're not aware of what mold-based illness looks like. Mold-based illness, or chronic inflammatory response syndrome, CIRS, is a multi-system illness that, if not treated, becomes progressive and can eventually become debilitating. I've seen many of my patients go on disability who came to me late in their disease. And it can really be a bone-crushing illness, although their bones don't actually get crushed. The hallmark of this illness is that you have to have an exposure. And according to the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, an exposure is if you can smell it or you can see it, or if you have abnormal commercial testing, by an indoor environmental professional, then you've been exposed. The second hallmark is multi-system illness. Now that's kind of a complicated medical term, but what it means is you don't have problems in just one part of your body. So most of our patients will have cognitive issues with memory loss or inattention, or they lose words when they're talking. It can become so profound that they become disoriented and they can't remember their own name or their spouse's name or their children's name. Another thing that we see is that most of our patients will have chronic fatigue. In fact, over 90% of them will have chronic fatigue. And it may be as little as, for a few days a week, you feel really down, or it could be every single day. It's hard to get out of bed, and the motivation to get out of bed is not there, and it's just too much effort. A lot of our patients have severe muscle pains that look like fibromyalgia. In fact, it may be the cause of many people's fibromyalgia is untreated mold. That's an unsubstantiated claim, but it's a belief that I hold. We also see people have chronic headaches, chronic stomach conditions that are not defined well by their patients, or maybe they're even diagnosed with IBS. We see joint pains, changes with your eyes, photophobia, problems with your special senses, like your taste can be off, your sense of smell can be off, you can get redness and inflammation in your eyes. You can have respiratory problems with chronic congestion, chronic coughing, shortness of breath for no well-defined reason. And then there are the neurologic issues. And there are a lot of neurologic issues, numbness and tingling and burning pains and stabbing pains and other kind of what we call neuropathic pains that have no reason. And then a host of other neurological issues, behavioral symptoms, difficulty falling asleep, abnormalities with your menstrual cycles if you're a woman, and frequent urination, some people going 10, 20 times a day, and a host of other symptoms. So it really is just a diffuse kind of number of abnormalities throughout your body.
So one of the commonalities that we've heard a lot on the Love, Hope, Lyme podcast, and I've spoken to thousands of Lyme survivors as well, relate this to mold. I've heard from people who've gone to 30 doctors, right? Before Lyme was properly diagnosed. Dr. Richard Horowitz, who wrote the foreword to my book, said he had a patient who went to 100. So give us an idea about someone's journey to realize. I mean, you listed a lot of symptoms, right? And we've people who listen to the show know that so many people were misdiagnosed, improperly diagnosed, which then eventually, unfortunately, leads to a lot of the mental challenges when you're constantly have these pains and you're not able to get a label for them and then begin treating. So Scott, Dr. McMahon, tell us about someone's journey to realize that mold is a problem. And Ariana, if you want to contribute or add to his comments, we'd love to hear that as well.
Yeah, you're exactly right. When I first started doing this work 15 years ago, it was not uncommon to find that patients had seen 30 doctors before they came to me. And it's really, I think, only with the increased awareness that we get through the internet, through people writing books, that people have become aware of this. At least the patients are aware of it. A lot of doctors, unfortunately, are still unaware. So you have these multiple symptoms and you go to your doctor. And of course, with healthcare the way it is nowadays, few doctors have the freedom to be able to go through your entire list of symptoms. You have a 15-minute appointment, so they can only talk about 2 or 3. And if you come in with 25, a lot of times you're characterized as being maybe a little bit mental. And then on top of that, most of the blood tests that are routinely taught to students in medical school come out normal. So unless you're looking for this, you won't find it. And it's the same with Lyme disease. Unless you're looking for it, you won't find it. And so these people eventually get told that they need to go see a psychiatrist. What I found was that if you spend time with them and you listen to all of their complaints, and I usually start with 2-hour visits, that you can very clearly see the pattern of someone who has mold or Lyme. And there's a tremendous amount of overlap between the symptoms of the two illnesses. And then it becomes fairly simple to make the proper diagnosis and start with the proper treatment. But if you're not aware of how to diagnose Lyme, you're never going to find it and you're not going to treat it properly. And it's the same in the mold world. So there are many, unfortunately, primary care physicians out there with no knowledge of this whatsoever. And their patients feel like they're not being listened to. They feel like they're being ignored. And again, sometimes they get sent to the psychiatrist. And that's just inappropriate because the information is out there and the medical world just they haven't turned the correct cheek yet to understand how pervasive these illnesses really are.
Yeah, Ariana, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, that was brilliant. There's so much going on and not going on, unfortunately, for these patients. This past year was the first time I was asked about mold in my environment by my primary care provider, just to give you a sense of how overlooked this is in terms of diagnostic criteria. Even after having identified the problem and connected mold to my health issues and relayed that to the providers, they were just not equipped, not understanding, even gaslighting as well, claiming that mold doesn't cause health effects, you don't have a fungal infection or asthma or allergies, this is something else, or it's all in your head, even with the physical presentation of symptoms. And this is just consistently what we see across all these different patient types. And we also surveyed over 5,000 patients nationally, and just the degree of symptoms and how they've already made the mold health connection has been clear, and they're not feeling heard. And you're seeing that in the Facebook groups and the Reddit groups. So people have to be their own doctor, or they pay out of pocket thousands, even tens of thousands. I've met people that have paid over $200,000 getting better, and they're still sick because this isn't really supported by insurance. So it tends to be a self-pay model. You go to these different higher end functional health clinics or wellness clinics or specialized clinics to get care. And it's just the only option for these patients. And even if you get filtered into these clinics, it's not guaranteed that you're going to get adequate care. There's a lot of misinformation there. A lot of controversy of what works and what doesn't. There's very expensive services like the plasmapheresis or even ozone therapy, very expensive IV drips where you have to come in consistently. And not all of these solutions have a lot of evidence to support that care. So I think even for the patients that end up filtering, having the mold health connection, going to the clinics and can afford to go to the clinics, they're not guaranteed the right experience either. So it's just across the chain on all different patient journeys. And it is something that we consistently see with these patients, unfortunately.
Yeah, Dr. McMahon, before I ask you about the ties between mold and Lyme, Ariana, quick question is, you know how a lot of people say, oh, we don't have Lyme in Texas, or we don't have Lyme in Southern California. Is this a regional, is there more of a preponderance in places like Florida and Europe in the New England area? Is this something that is across the country? Is it a global problem? Lyme, kind of give us some insights into the geographic nature of the disease, if you
Yeah, so
can.
I don't have so much of that data. I only have anecdotal evidence from speaking to different providers at different clinics, but we are seeing higher prevalence of these cases on the East Coast, so versus like the West Coast. But besides that, I don't really have a lot of in-depth data. I also think a lot of the diagnostic processes are poor. For example, I hear that the LabCorp and Quest test for Lyme isn't so accurate, and then you have to go to these more pricier or esoteric options like IGeneX, for example. So I don't think we have a complete data set, and we don't really know how big this problem is, and even the diagnostic criteria to meet Lyme disease is pretty narrow. So what's the total sum of all the patients experiencing tick-borne illness? It could just be a much broader set. And just because you don't see the tick or see the bite or have immediate symptoms doesn't mean it didn't happen. So I think there's just a lot more to learn here, but I'm sure Dr. McMahon has a much more complete answer to this question. Yeah.
Well, Dr. McMahon, so again, this is the Love, Hope, Lyme podcast. Tie this together, tie mold and Lyme together. Why did I ask you and Ariana to come on today's show and give us the insights into mold and Lyme?
Well, I think the best way to describe it is to use an analogy. The analogy that I use is that when I was in medical school, I asked one of my professors, why isn't there a vaccine for the common cold? I mean, we're familiar with the common cold. And the answer that they gave me that I didn't fully understand at the time, the answer that they gave me was because there are 50 different viruses that cause the common cold. And I came away with that thinking, wow, there's 50 different viruses that cause the same symptoms. But what I came to learn later on is that there are 50 different viruses that trigger the innate immune system. And when the innate immune system is triggered and is overproducing chemicals like cytokines and is overproducing those cytokines are what are actually causing the symptoms. And so when you look at the common cold, you have diverse number of triggers, but they're all going through the immune system to cause your symptoms. And I think when you have that understanding, it helps you understand mold and Lyme. For the average bear or the average doctor bear, I don't think most of them can discern between a case of chronic Lyme disease and a chronic mold just based on symptoms, because the symptom overlap is roughly 100%. I mean, one case looks just like the other. even using the blood work that we use to diagnose patients with mold disease, they are identical in patients with chronic Lyme disease. And those tests are all looking at the innate immune system. There are only some very specialized ways looking at transcriptomic tests and or brain MRIs using very special advanced techniques that I can distinguish someone who has Lyme from someone who has mold, or potentially they have both. So having said that, I would say that chronic Lyme disease and CIRS are actually the same illness with different triggers. And in one of them, it was a water damaged building, and the antigenic, that's a fancy word, the different materials that they're inhaling in their body that are foreign to their body that trigger the innate immune system. And for Lyme disease patients, they get a number of things from the tick that bit them, including the Lyme disease and what the Borrelia makes as far as toxins and antigenic material or foreign material. And those also activate the innate immune system. And as a result of the innate immune system being overstimulated, overreacted over a long period of time, you develop all of these symptoms that look very similar between the two illnesses.
Dr. McMahon, I'm going to ask you a different question. In 1 minute or less, can you help us understand what chemically happens? With Lyme, we know it's typically a tick-borne bacteria or parasites that get into the bloodstream, they get into the joints, and if they cross the blood-brain barrier, it's a spirochete, it digs itself in deep. Can you give us, again, 1 minute or less, what actually happens? How does the mold enter the body? Where does it go? What does it do? Again, don't spend 5, 10 minutes on this, but in 1 minute or less, kind of give us an understanding of how mold overtakes the body to lead to all the symptoms and all the challenges that we're talking about that led to MoldCo being created.
So if you live or work or go to school in a moldy environment, you will inhale both mold spores and fragments of mold. When you inhale them, they go into your lungs. The immune system, the innate immune system in your lungs, identifies the abnormal antigens there and starts an innate immune system response. That immune system response is usually adequate, and you eventually make antibody and it's no big deal. But if you're a mold patient, then you don't make the antibody to it. You continue to breathe the antigen in. You continue the innate immune system reaction until you come to a point where you no longer can keep that under control. Then it becomes chronic, and then it spills over and starts causing problems of regulation in other parts of your body. I hope that's not too technical, but that's my 1 minute version. And
The end.
And I think the similar process is occurring in Lyme patients. So you do have the Borrelia that get into the body, and they also trigger the innate immune system. You may destroy the Borrelia, but if you continue to have fragments, then you continue to trigger the innate immune system within. We see the same innate immune system abnormal labs in chronic Lyme patients as we do with chronic mold patients. And it's because the innate immune system continues to be triggered by whatever is still inside the person.
So, Ariana, based on what Dr. McMahon just said, again, you're a mold patient. Do you want to give us some additional insights on what it feels like to have mold in your body? And, so the people who may be family members, partners, and friends may be able to relate to what their loved one is going through?
Yeah, I mean, it just felt like a deterioration of my health. I was I had a moment where I was like, wow, I don't think I can contribute to the world anymore to the level I thought I could, because I thought my cognitive deficits were just so extreme. I was just so exhausted all the time, and I was just mapping out this version of my life. I'm like, what if I'm just at this state for the rest of my life? How does that change things? I felt so embarrassed by the symptoms. I started becoming a hermit. I didn't want to talk to people. There was a point where I was even slurring my words, and I wasn't able to process audio. someone would say something and I understood that they were speaking English, but it wasn't really registering what they were saying. I had to reread emails multiple times to process that information. It was just very emotional and very challenging. And also the mood changes that come up too, just the uncontrollable anxiety and depression that's there on top of feeling like no one within the medical system's on your side too, or they're not believing what's going on, they're not sympathetic to it, they're not able to take it to that next step, and having to then navigate so much information online without a medical background or even feeling like totally well was just so challenging on top of while all this was happening, I was reactive to my environment. I ended up getting rid of most of my things. I was hopping around to different hotels and Airbnbs to try to find a safe place to live. So yeah, it was just super challenging. And on top of that, you're also usually dealing, if you're a renter, a landlord that's whose primary focus is minimizing their liability. So there's a lot of dishonesty. For example, my landlord kept my security deposit, even having gone through all this, and acknowledgement that there was awareness of mold and not wanting to fix the issue. So I just don't think there's a lot of protection, rights, understanding, empathy, training, et cetera, for patients just across the board. And even if you were to go to a personal injury lawyer, it's hard to find folks that understand how to navigate that for you too. So I think you're just met with just what feels like insurmountable problems at every step along the journey. And without the right resources or know-how or just will to live, will to regain your health, you just stay stuck. And it gets worse from there for a lot of patients. I know one patient we've been interacted with hundreds now through our customer discovery process. One of my good friends now through this journey, he's living outside. He was living in a tent. So this is just what people have to do to adapt to this new way of being, because they're just so failed on so many levels. It's really sad.
Well, thanks for sharing that, and thanks for your bravery, and congratulations on creating MoldCo. And before I ask you both for your final thoughts and anything that we need to know, on the MoldCo site, moldco.com, there's a great frequently asked question fact section that covers dozens of topics that will answer many questions people have. Just kind of curious, what are the most common questions, most common concerns that you're getting? You just mentioned you've been speaking to the thousands of people in your discovery state. What are some of the most common things that they're asking you?
Oh, wow. So many questions. I mean, I think a top question is, how do I know what the health impact has been? How do I find a credible home inspector? How do I know if there's mold in my home? We have a checklist. Actually, it's completely free on our website. That's a detailed guide of some of the common visual and sensory cues, like having that earthy, musty odor in your home, noticing like warped wallpaper, noticing where there could have been water damage, and having a more detailed internal external inspection is just a first pass. There's also a dust test on our website too. It doesn't replace a mold certified home inspector, but it's a great way to kind of get a historical fingerprint of what's been in your home from these various common species. We often recommend the Hertz Me Too or the ERMI test through EnviroBiomics. So that's on our website. And then if as a stopgap, because it is often so hard to find a new environment, and especially if you're an owner, we have air purifiers that uses something called bipolar ionization technology to eradicate some of these microbial species. And we did go through, we worked with the owner there to get third-party validated data to make sure that it was legit, and it was. So that's also offered on our website too. So that it's not a solution yet. It's more placeholders until you can find a certified home inspector and remediator and find a clean environment, which is often one of the hardest steps, is just getting into a clean home.
Wow. All right. Once again, I want to thank Ariana Thacker and Dr. Scott McMahon. The company is called MoldCo. I want to remind people that my book, Love, Hope, Lyme, what family members, partners, and friends who love a chronic Lyme survivor need to know is on Amazon. The PDF is always free. Just reach out to me via Facebook, any form of social media, and we'll get you a copy of that. I just want to acknowledge you both again for giving us all this information. When I started the research for Love Hope Lyme, I knew mold was a thing. I didn't realize how it destroyed lives. I didn't realize how challenging it was. Ariana, the example you just gave, I would see posts from people up on social media saying, I need a safe place to go because the mold has overtaken my apartment and I believe my car might be moldy and the landlord's not doing anything and all this and it's a challenge to work when you have these types of chronic illnesses, Scott, and let alone paying the tens of thousands that it takes, because you're right, these aren't traditional diseases that are covered by insurance, which is a whole different topic. So I just want to acknowledge you both for being on the show and giving the insights and for the work that you're doing to solve insane problems for so many people. Dr. McMahon, is there any final thoughts? Anything else that you'd like us to know? And then Ariana, I'll ask you the same question.
I just want to thank you, Fred, for having us and for bringing awareness to Lyme disease and the tragedy it is in many people's lives and for mold. And I think they're very similar illnesses and the pathways are very similar, although you might get it in different ways. And so I just want to thank you and let people know that there are resources and it is treatable. And the earlier you get treatment, the better.
That's great advice. Ariana, why don't you bring us home?
Yeah, echoing what Scott just shared. And if you are looking for care through our platform, and you're located in Texas and Florida, we are actively accepting patients. So just reach out at support@moldco.com. I read all of those emails, our team's reading those emails. So feel free to send us a note. And if you're not in those states, don't be discouraged. Just sign up on our website at moldco.com. And we have a growing wait list and we'll notify you when we're live in your state.
All right. Thank you both. My name is Fred Diamond. Once again, this is the Love Hope Lyme podcast.